Greetings and welcome to the B&H Photography Podcast. My name is Alan Weitz.
And I'm Jill Waterman.
And as always, our audio engineer, Mike Weinstein, will no doubt be chiming in with a question or two of his own along the way. While December's pale light and chilly breezes can limit great photo ops, at least when it comes to the Northern Hemisphere, this time of year we get juiced just thinking about presenting our annual Photo Gear of the Year show, now in its 9th edition. And by the way, I happen to notice that copies of our first 3 Gear of the Year shows recently sold on eBay for $7,000. If you have copies, keep them in a cool, dark place because they're getting hotter than crypto coins. Trust me on this one. Anyway, this year we're taking a novel approach. We're going to ditch the A to Z laundry list in favor of a more dynamic flow of notable cameras from 2024 based on the buzz generated by you, the consumer, and grouped by general camera type. We're hoping this structure will allow you to better compare the features offered by various brands when considering available options for upgrading your gear. Additionally, we're starting the show with a little peek behind the scenes in the life of a B&H sales trainer and the role he plays in helping sales team members to better serve our customers. Finally, for those of you who are curious about what the future may bring, at the end of the show, we'll bring some photo gear predictions for 2025. For informed insights about all of the above, we welcome as our recurring guest, Kevin Rickert, B&H Photo Senior Sales Trainer for Photography and Lighting. It's Kevin's job to collaborate with camera and lens manufacturers to create curriculum for training B&H's world-renowned sales staff. He knows his stuff. Born and raised in New York, Kevin is an intrepid street photographer, an avid traveler, and a devoted baseball fan with 22 years of experience in electronic retail, the last 10 of which have been spent as a sales trainer at B&H. Kevin Rickert, welcome back.
Hello. Thanks for having me once again. It's that time of year, I suppose.
You noticed, huh?
Yeah.
We even had snow this morning. Okay, before we start talking about hardware, let's start talking about what your role is as a sales trainer. What's your day like? What are you responsible for? What are the kind of things that you are doing that gets the sales department and the people that help our customers do a better job?
So my purview is photography, lighting, and optics. So that's my piece of the pie chart. So my responsibility would be making sure when a new camera is released, the vendor comes in, trains our staff so they know exactly what the camera does, features that may compare from the last one to the current generation, or if it's something brand new entirely, that they know how it benefits the customers. And sometimes my other roles include when the customers ask a lot of hard questions that are sometimes esoteric, if this works with that, what's the size of the tripod leg, those questions which aren't normally listed in specs, I could reach out to the manufacturer, the buyer, a brand representative, and get that answer so the sales associate could give that to the customer. As well as if there's a topic that is hitting all the sales associate over the head, let's say like this year is magnetic filters, power and battery. Like a lot of times customers come in and ask like, how long is this battery going to last? Or do I have a portable battery generator for this lighting rig that we have? We're doing an on-location shoot and we need to know how long it's going to last. So I would reach out to other manufacturers like, hey, employees are having issues trying to figure this out. Do you mind coming in and training our sales staff? Making curriculum based on that so the employees are informed and they become more of a knowledgeable foundation so they understand what the customers may ask and they're well informed to lead them down the right path when it comes down to options, because it's thousands and thousands of options these days. Like you could just go on the tripods part of our website and it's like, how many tripods are there? So think about being a sales associate at B&H and it's just a customer's like, hey, I need a tripod. And you see so many options. So we have to ask the right questions to put them on the right path so they have something that works for their specific needs, because no customers are the same. It's almost like a game of guess who. So you have to ask these questions to like narrow it down to like 2 options, and then from those 2 options, which will be the best one for the customer.
But also you're saying, Kevin, that in a given year or a given time period, there will be a preponderance of a certain type of question that you can then say, look, we really need to update the curriculum about this particular issue because everyone's doing this one kind of thing. And this year, that's been what, batteries?
So what I do at this time of the year, especially after we finish our training year, because when we get into the holidays, there's no sales training going on because everybody has to be all hands on deck. I put a survey out to the sales team. I'm like, what do you need to be trained on? What topics and what brands do you want to come in? So when I did that last year, it was batteries and powers, like V-mount batteries, portable power solutions for lighting. Magnetic filters was a big one because there's so many magnetic filter brands out there now, and every brand is coming out with them. It's very confusing to some people that they don't know, does this work with this? Does this work with that? Some brands have like multiple lines that aren't compatible with each other. So it's doing that. And who knows what's going to be this year, but it's making sure that everybody's up to date. And if there's multiple employees saying we need help with this, it's my job to reach out to those manufacturers or learn it on my own if I don't know it already, to train them on that so they understand it. So kind of squash that bug, basically.
Yeah, we've mentioned this in the past, and I'm just going to reiterate it. When we say that our sales reps and training reps come into the store, it's not like they're standing there in the store during sales time when customers are around everything, and they're trying to train people while they're doing their job in the store. It's not at all like that. What's really neat about B&H and kind of unique, there's a separate building that has classrooms in it that are dedicated for training. And when you're talking to somebody on the sales floor or on chat, whoever you're talking to, they don't get on that phone or on the floor until they know what they're talking about. They're well drilled. So it's not like there's guessing and looking things up online. This stuff is drilled into most all of our salespeople. And a lot of these people, they don't even have to look this stuff up. They're responsible for it.
Yeah, but that begs the question, salespeople aren't a monolithic group of people, right? You're going to have some salespeople who I assume are going to have an understanding of photography that better matches what you think is needed to help out customers. Is that right?
So one of my other responsibilities is training the new hires, if they're a photo employee or a lighting employee, on the curriculum that we have that is basically the bare essentials, what you should know to be a B&H superstore or phones or chat employee. It's a foundational knowledge.
Right.
And we do assessments too. When an employee comes in, we ask them questions based on what they know. So we get like that high watermark, like what do they know already, and correcting that. And then reassessing them at the end of 2 months to see what they retained. And then we put them out in the wild, they get their vests in the store, and then they're helping employees in their respective area.
Is there a focus on the practical use of information? I mean, in other words, trying to quickly assess what a customer's needs are and not getting too bogged down with all the trivial facts of what a camera is and how it works.
Yeah, exactly. So the way I approach it, when a new employee comes in the company, I tell them, like a Venn diagram, you're aiming for the middle. Because you have the customers who are very technical and may not be that, artistically creative. They just know specs, and they come in and ask specs all the time, but they're taking pictures of, like, their dog. They're just gearheads. Then you have the other customers who are very, very talented. They have a great eye for photography, but they think that the A on their camera means auto. It means aperture. And they're like, oh, I thought it meant something else. So you have those customers. So I tell the employees, aim for the middle. So you're always able to adjust. If you have a techie customer, you're great. If you go for a more creative customer, you're great, and you're able to talk to them equally. Right. So it's about being agile in that sense.
One thing I just wanted to touch back on, what's the difference between being a salesperson on the floor and being behind the counter?
Usually when you're on the floor, so there's brand kiosks. If anybody's been to the superstore, there's like Canon, Nikon, Sony, FUJIFILM, and others. So normally when you get hired, you start at one. I started in Sony. And then I worked my way up. So you're supposed to be the expert in the Sony product. And when you conquer that, you move on to maybe Canon or Nikon. Then when you have a good foundation, you go to the sales counter, because with that, you have to have all the knowledge. Because you're going to have customers coming to you, I'm looking for the best camera to do X, Y, and Z. Right. As opposed to the kiosk where someone just comes to me, oh, tell me about the new FUJIFILM camera or the new Sony camera. And then that's that.
Cool.
Okay.
On that note, maybe we should start talking about the gear of the year.
So what camera should we buy? Let's just come right to the point here. That's all we need to know. Actually, let's fine-tune that question. What camera stood out the most this year, and why was this particular camera so special?
Even more fundamental than that, is this year different from all other years?
Sounds like Passover.
Was there something interesting about the releases this year relative to other years that you noticed, the past 4 or 5 years?
Was it last year or the year before that we discussed shipping, things like that, how shipping may impact?
The supply chains, I think, from the pandemic were still...
Exactly. This year, a lot of brands are putting out lenses, but the camera releases were kind of quiet. Some cameras came out in the beginning of the year, then it was kind of quiet for the majority of the middle part of the year, and then you had some releases at the end. So it wasn't really a heavy photo camera year, but we started off very hot with the FUJIFILM X100VI. And when you think about it, that's basically because it's a supply chain issue. What happened was, if anybody remembers, during the pandemic, the X100 went viral. But it went viral like mid-product cycle. So when that happens, everybody rushed to get that camera. But supply chain issues, not everybody was able to get that camera.
That came out right before the pandemic.
Yes.
Right?
And it was like not hard to get, but it wasn't easy to get either. But since it went viral mid-cycle, it was kind of those things that Fujifilm, it's like, all right, we can't make as much as we want to because we're mid-cycle on this. We have to start preparing for the future. So when the Fujifilm X100VI was announced, everybody who missed that on the 5 rushed to get it. Everybody who wanted to make a quick buck by reselling the camera rushed to get it. I'd never seen a camera do numbers like that. There were so many people trying to get this camera, and just looking at them, like, I've never seen a camera so hot before. I've seen many camera releases and never seen something like this. This was like a midnight release for a video game back when people did that. People used to go to stores and buy video games and DVDs and wait outside online. So it's remarkable what this camera did.
So with that incredible popularity in the front end, did the camera totally sell out really quickly, or how did that affect the supply chain?
Sellout is a interesting term because it's still very hard to get. I mean, I know that Fujifilm is putting them out there and people are receiving them, but the amount of people who pre-ordered this camera and thus back-ordered this camera, it's just an immense list. Probably will take a while. But, I mean, the camera itself shows how the industry is kind of shifting in a way, or maybe it's just like what people are thinking about. People want to get off from using like their larger camera, interchangeable lens. So Fujifilm X100VI, any other X100 series, and Fujifilm overall is known for its film simulation. So you get really good quality of images straight out of the camera, like JPEG. And you can use software to get the simulations on your RAWs. But with that said, it's a 40 megapixel camera that fits in your pocket, a 35 millimeter equivalent lens, which is great. The stabilization, all the bells and whistles as far as film simulations is concerned. Everybody wanted this camera. So that camera came out in February, and it was just nuts. And people were just like, wow, why is this happening? It was a chain reaction, just, fortuitous bounces here and there that led to this camera being so big. And it's a great camera. I like the X100 series. And based on that, you can kind of see how the industry went with other cameras. Because mostly every brand is trying to capitalize on that type of camera. A fixed lens, pocketable camera with great image quality.
One question that I have, and I have it because I've not used them yet, and I know Fuji really talks a lot about the film emulations. How accurate are they?
They do an extremely good job because they're one of the few companies who developed the film, and they know the color science behind it. And the fact, since their sensor is a bit unique in the field with the X-trans sensor, it doesn't use a bare sensor, which is a type of pattern that's used. So there's a lot of technical benefits to that. But since Fujifilm developed the film and they developed the camera, it puts them in a unique position to be like, all right, 1-to-1, you could do this and get something that looks like Provia, Velvia, things like that.
So it's the kind of thing that if you looked at the picture, you could actually guess fairly accurately what it was emulating?
Yeah.
In other words, if you know what the different films actually look like. A lot of people talk about, but you show them pictures, they have no clue as to what was used to take the picture. They don't know a Kodachrome from a Kodacolor. They don't know.
Yeah, well, the Fuji is not going to give you Kodachrome, that's for sure.
Well, see, that's my problem.
I just want to be the real negative cynic here. I mean, I've always felt that the Fujifilm simulations were gimmicky. I know a little bit about Photoshop and presets, and I've downloaded some and used them over the years. And I also got this thing called the Nick collection a long time ago.
Yeah.
I don't know. What's your take on this?
I think it kind of started as like a gimmick, but remember at the same time, film photography had its resurgence. And developing and buying rolls of film is not cheap unless you're doing black and white and developing it yourself. But it kind of helped because I remember years ago, I mean, people went for Fujifilm cameras, but it wasn't like how it is now. It's like hot, and there was like so many people using that as their second camera. Someone shot Sony or Canon, and they had a Fujifilm camera. And that's kind of why it went viral. It was like you could get the film look.
That's what I mean, though. Whether or not a feature of a camera system is legitimate, it still might be the case that it's an incredible boom for the company because of the way it's marketed. I guess maybe you can make the case that because of its bona fides, the fact that it has this color science, people can rest assured that you don't have to download some presets for some funky website or for some guy who just made it in his bedroom. This is the real deal, and maybe that's part of it. You don't have to work as hard.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like you don't have to work as hard because you're getting a look out the camera. Granted, if you shoot RAW, you're not going to get that look unless you use software to reapply that look. But once you're going to get the benefits of RAW. And then if you see like other brands, what they're doing, not to jump ahead a little bit, but the Nikon Z50 II, I believe the new Sony A1 II, the S9, cameras like that have like these built-in like picture looks now, or built-in LUTs. You could make your own LUT and put it in there because obviously the presets on the Fujifilm camera can be used for video as well, and that needs to have a certain look. So if someone's trying to get a consistent look, there you go, it works. And also on the film side, someone could go like, all right, let me shoot film, and then let me just have some supplements and have the looks almost look the same. They could just have that.
By the way, does Fuji have post-in-computer software to do this stuff? Or do they really push for, no, like, we do have this stuff, but we really want people to shoot JPEGs. I mean, that's the whole point of this, is in the in-camera kind of like hassle-freeness of it.
That's on the user end if they want to. Like people shoot raw and JPEG, but the thing is like Capture One is a good example of it. And I think Lightroom has this as well, that you could just drop down, and since they have the Fuji profiles, you could just choose that simulation on your RAW file, and then you get the same output. So you get both worlds, and there's different things that you could do, bracketing and such like that, with the looks on there. And also the big thing about the Fujifilm cameras is that there's this whole community that does recipes, which is like different presets to look a certain way for maybe non-Fujifilm film stocks, or maybe a photographer. Like, I remember seeing a pack, this is years ago, get the Stephen Shore recipe.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. Seen that, yeah.
Anyway, next down the list here is a camera that I've always been interested in myself, and that's the Ricoh GR3.
GR3, so this year they came out with a version of the GR3, and they have different versions of this camera. And this rides along the coattails of the X100VI. A lot of people went to this route, which gives us idea. You could do your own look as far as colors is concerned, but it's a fixed lens camera, 24 megapixels APS-C, which is the same sensor size of the X100 series, but the resolution is a little bit different there, 40 versus 26. But the major thing to note is that they come out with a version that's called the HDF, which has a diffusion filter there to give you more of a dreamy look. It's kind of like, if you watch old Hollywood films, they would have this like glow to them, and that's because of a diffusion filter. That was kind of a way to make, Greta Garbo not have too many
You just
wrinkles.
put Vaseline on the lens.
Soft tars, I think they called Hasselblad soft tars. Little dimples on the glass, that's what they used. I remember those.
Don't they use stockings as well to kind of diffuse it? Yeah. So this camera has that feature inside of it.
It sounds like you're trying to describe like a 50 millimeter 1.2 Nikkor. You open up the wide aperture and everything takes on this magic glow. That's what it sounds like you're describing to me. Just one of those fast wide aperture lenses shot that way. Just everything starts to have this glow about it, which I love.
Yeah, so they have two versions of the HDF camera. They have the GR3X, which has a 40 millimeter equivalent lens, and then they have the GR3 HDF, which has a 28 millimeter equivalent lens. And those are good street photography. Focal lengths are like 28 and 40. But yeah, they give you the option there.
It sounds like baby Leica Qs, actually.
Slightly, yeah.
The offerings, you think about 28 and a 40 millimeter?
Which kind of goes to show you how like some parts of the industry are thinking. And let's go for fixed lens cameras. Fixed lens, big sensor, the X100VI. You have the GR3 series, the GR3X. You have the Leica Q3s, the Q3 43. things like that. There's other ones that were released this past year, and I hope that starts a trend that manufacturers open their eyes again and be like, oh, there's a demand for this because, the other day was Black Friday and Cyber Monday, and the amount of times that people called up asking for a mid-range point and shoot was kind of, astounding. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, it's a real thing.
Yeah,
it's a real thing.
Yeah, it's every other call, and I see people behind me. We're taking phone calls as well, and I see the same camera up there. It feels like the manufacturer's like, all right, let's get in this room. What we're going to discuss making mirrorless cameras, and everybody's like, we got to make all the mirrorless cameras. Let's do mirrorless. Someone probably was like in the room, what about point and shoots? Nah, no one's asking for that. And we reached a point that now people are like, hey, those are kind of cool. Can we bring those back? And none of manufacturers have come back to that. And I'm not sure if that's a supply chain thing.
Yeah, I would imagine a lot of those are all dried up. I mean, I'm talking about the stuff from the early 2000s, the point and shoots from the first digital cameras.
Yeah, and also, last January, I went to Thailand and Japan. But when I was in Japan, I always go use camera shopping because where else am I going to do it? And one of the things I noticed was for the first time in the used camera shops, there was a focus on those 2010 era point and shoots. Some store divided like CCD sensor, CMOS sensor, or non-SD point and shoot camera, because that's an important thing to know too. A lot of people will come in and buy like, oh, let me buy this Fujifilm or Olympus stylus camera from 2008, but it takes an XD card, which you can't buy brand new anymore. It's a remarkable thing to just go in the store and be like, I remember when that camera was sold brand new, that PowerShot, SX720 or something like that. I'm like, all right, it's being sold for a little bit more than what it retailed for, more or less. But now there's that demand to get, quote unquote, the digicam look is what they call it online.
Right.
I'm like, oh.
And the funny thing is, a lot of these old cameras, I have a few of these old little 3.2 megapixel ones. Some of them really gorgeous. Contacts made some real pretty little cameras, but you can't get batteries for them anymore.
Oh, yeah.
That's a problem. If you're going to buy one of these cameras, make sure you can get a battery, because they don't make third party for a lot of these real old ones. They just don't. There's no demand.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very important point. It's like you have to be able to find accessories for it, and it's tougher these days.
So, Kevin, you brought up the term the digicam look. I know what you're referring to, and it's not good. It's just so weird. I mean, there's always this positive nostalgia bias that's just in there at all times through cultures.
Instax is a perfect example of that.
Yeah, but Instax at least gives you like a physical, thing.
Yes, for $3 you get a small, awful color
You want to put
print.
that up against a frame grab from a digicam, though? I mean, we're talking like jagged, aliased, and gross.
Just keep one thing in mind. There's a saying in the automotive business that there's a seat for every ass and an ass for every seat. Okay,
that's good to know.
And that's really what it boils down to, man. The good thing is we have these options. If you want to choose a difficult path to enjoy photography, you're welcome to do so. Everyone needs their challenges, and you have the right to face these challenges.
Okay, challenge accepted. This brings to mind something that we don't have in our official podcast talking points for this episode, but it's something that I've been seeing in the camera industry news lately, maybe for a while, and forums, etc., which is, where are the modern low-cost point and shoot cameras?
Do those exist?
Yeah, they don't.
It's basically,
Okay.
So that's one of the things that a lot of people were coming in for. There was two cameras that stood out that were older. It was a Canon PowerShot G7X Mark II and Mark III that people were asking for, and also a Canon PowerShot L360 HS that people were asking for.
What are those, circa 20?
The sevens were, I think, since I've worked here, so within the past 10 years. But the 360, it has to be within like 7 years, pre-pandemic, obviously. And it's just like, I know why people are doing this, so there's a generation, but it's just like, it's the manufacturers, I don't know if maybe they are waking up to the fact that they need to do this.
So there's no sub $500 point and shoot that's popular today.
Nope. I'm trying to think of a brand that released a trying to think, point and shoot, like I know Ricoh probably has like a few cameras, but Ricoh isn't like
Correct.
big in, they're not.
Olympus has like the tough cameras. You know?
That's the only thing that people, is like just the waterproof ones, the rugged waterproof ones.
Those are the only
That's
ones
the
that
only
I
thing.
buy right now.
Right.
They're good for travel.
But other than that, you're saying that there is nothing to buy sub 500 point and shoot with a little zoom lens in there.
From a major brand?
From a major brand.
But not that I would say. There's brands out there that are rebranded with legacy names, Minolta, Kodak. But that's more of a different thing because when I look at those, it's just like, I don't want. But if you look at how the environment of cameras is, Canon hasn't released a fixed lens, like an L4 higher in power shot 1-inch sensor for a while, okay? And 1-inch sensor would be the perfect size if you want something that's not APS-C because it's just the lens has to be bigger. But there's ways to balance it. So Canon hasn't really done anything. Sony hasn't come out with a successor to the RX100 series. It's been a while for that. They've been concentrating on their vlogging cameras, like the ZV-1 and such like that, but nothing that's more photocentric.
Or that could just fit in your pocket.
Exactly. Panasonic, no. You can kind of see the lay of the land here. It's like Ricoh has the GR, but that's like APS-C and a very hot commodity right now. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. Everything old is new again.
Yeah, huh?
I want to see if brands start to push out and make more 1-inch sensor or APS-C point and shoots. If I was a brand, I would definitely make a few point and shoot cameras that are like within 1 inch, because you don't want to oversaturate it like it was in 2010 when we go to like to DP Review and just look at the timeline for like 2010 in January and you see just every brand came, because it was CES and that's where everybody came out with cameras.
No, yeah, but there's zero now.
Yeah, you need a 1-inch sensor or APS-C. And Sony and Canon have proven that's a viable size. It's the perfect balance of quality and size. And if you want to go to longer zooms, cameras like the RX10, Panasonic has their 1-inch sensor. Nikon was about to get into that industry with the DLs. And they had 3 different versions of that. And they were about to go into the 1-inch sensor because they had it at the time for the mirrorless line. They had the Nikon 1.
When was this?
2015, around there.
Yeah, around 10 years ago, yeah.
They were about to come out with 3 different ones. And they had different focal lengths. And then they scrapped it. And they were just like, we're not going to do this. Also around the same time, which is a camera that I wish would come back, is the Nikon Coolpix A. It was an APS-C pocket camera that existed that would do well now. Fujifilm had the X70. I'm not sure when that went off the market, but that was another fixed lens APS-C size camera that existed. Just aim for the 1-inch or APS-C. I think people will go for it because it's going to be better than a smartphone. And if you look at calls I received this past weekend, a lot of people are like, hey, I'm doing like macro photography or taking pictures of like jewelry or watches with my smartphone, but I don't like the AI processing that it's doing. And that's something that's happening. The computational photography that smartphones do, granted, it's pushed smartphone photography to a point that it looks really good, but sometimes it's overdoing it. There is a company that does that app Halide in Kino, and it came out with something called Process Zero, which is a version of like a process for taking away that look, so it's not over-processed.
Right, there's an app for Android that's like, it's called like Direct Camera or something. It's just taking the stuff off the chip, no processing.
Exactly. It's like getting raw, like
right.
true image without the extra seasoning that the smartphone does. And I think that's why digicams that look, because it's like we don't want to overprocess. Right. And it's kind of like a nostalgia thing as well. But it's just like, I do want more manufacturers to come out with maybe 1 or 2 modestly priced point-and-shoot cameras, so it will take a lot of pressure off people buying older cameras, because a lot of those cameras are backordered and they're hard to get, and it's putting a little bit of pressure. And it's like, where do we go when it comes down to that?
You direct them to use.
Yeah, you direct them to use if point-and-shoots are there, or take a flight to Japan. But going back to the camera that I said was the most impactful one, which is the X100VI, the GR3, which is a very popular camera. That's also kind of hard to find. And the other cameras that have popped up this year, like the Leica D-Lux 8, which is a follow-up to the 7, which is very similar to a certain Panasonic camera.
Isn't it amazing how incredibly similar they are? It's always
I know.
The older ones actually just look very similar to the Fuji cameras too. Very interesting.
Is it actually the same exact camera with the rebrand?
To answer your question, yes. It's made by Panasonic, but there are differences to it. A lot of it having to do with software. And the way it was explained, it used to be with the Leica version, you'd have more options for JPEG compression, which is not that big a deal. But what Leica was saying they were doing as opposed to the other companies. Rather than try to tweak for pretty color, Leica engineers would try to give you the most neutral color, which is what they always design into the coatings of their lenses on their cameras. So the whole thing for Leica is, you want it to be as neutral and as natural as possible. And if you want to jack it up from there, you can go play on your own, but the camera won't do it for you.
About that Leica look. Yeah, but it's a micro four thirds camera, the D-Lux 8, which, coming from the 7, and also it was the LX100 that Panasonic had at the time, which, was a distant cousin camera.
It's like the old Hexars back in the film day. That's essentially what it is. It's the new version of a Hexar.
The LX100, is this an open secret?
I think it's an open secret. You have to be really not paying attention. Wow, those two cameras look exactly alike. They have the same exact specs. It's one of those things. But what makes it different, and we'll get to another camera later that has this, or the past generation did, is that Leica controls their imaging pipeline. So if the processor is different on how it extrapolates the data coming off the sensor, even though the sensor is the same, it'll give a different look.
Yeah.
Is how it's cooking. But 17 megapixels, 24 to 75 equivalent full frame, smaller. If someone doesn't have Leica Q money but wants to get something Leica that's portable, gives you options for changing your aspect ratio, those cameras are cool. So that came out in the summertime. And then on the higher end from Leica, you had the Q3, 43, which is a version of the Q3 that has a 43 millimeter lens. Aposummicron. So
it's not micro four thirds though.
it is not micro four thirds. That's why
Full frame.
So, yep, it's a full frame, 60 megapixel.
I've owned that camera, not this particular one, but Q2, and I when the original came out, I did a test on. I was really taken by the camera. I think it's a wonderful concept. I liked everything about it, and I think this new version with the 43 millimeter is a nice addition to that line if you want to photograph with a more quote unquote normal perspective rather than wide angle.
Both versions of the Q3 are great if you have the money, but it shows that upper echelon of what a fixed lens, I don't like calling them point and shoots, but it's just a fixed lens camera, gives you everything that Leica has been putting out recently with the 60 megapixel triple resolution sensor, and just having weather sealing. The image quality is great. Ergonomically, for me, it's tough. You probably need a grip on it, but
it is not the most comfortable camera to hold. Yeah, now I'll agree with you. And I'm glad they added a tilt screen to it, because that really frustrated me with the earlier versions that had a fixed screen, even though I understand why they did it. But it kind of bothered me because I do a lot of weird angle shots, and that camera made me work harder. It definitely did. Yeah, it's a lot of money. But I'm also looking at how much the new top-of-the-line Sony, and you don't get a lens with it. I'm not knocking the camera, but you think about it, what you get with the Q series, you're getting a hell of a lens with a hell of a camera.
yeah, you definitely are. But
Yeah, if one breaks, you're stuck with the other one. So I know.
no, not even that. It's like any fixed lens. It's like, oh, I just want to get different focal length. Well, you got to buy another Q3.
Yeah, yeah.
Hey, you got legs? Walk around.
It's true. It's just, people who want a Leica will get a Leica. Sometimes there's too many things that work backwards online. I come across, I try not to dive deep into articles because I think they're just trying to make you click on them, but some of them just like what's the best 85 millimeter lens? And it doesn't say what brand. It says which is the best. I never had an experience in which a customer called up and was like, hi, I'm looking for the best 85 millimeter lens, and I'll choose my camera off of that. It's always the opposite. It's like, I have a camera, this brand, what's the best 85 or like zoom lens I could get for it? So it's just like, if someone wants something, they'll target it. It's based on what the use case is, what they're trying to do. And, that's why we ask the customers questions to qualify them, to make sure that they're going down the right path. And that's why sometimes you have to ask those questions to yourself. Like, why am I doing this? Why do I want this camera? What's it going to do for me? Am I overspending on stuff that I'm not going to use?
Am I feeding my ego or my needs?
Mm-hmm.
No, seriously, look, we're all human, and we definitely all react this way. But a lot of this stuff is emotional, okay? It really, really is. You judge yourself by what you have hanging around your neck, and that's really wrong. It really
right,
is.
But it's funny, the physicality, the tactile, it's a machine, it's a crafted German precision machine thing. that can have this positive effect where it gets the camera into your hand quickly, and you taking pictures, you become sort of motivated just by the fact of the aesthetics of the thing.
Oh, yeah. There are times, I'm going out and I want to take a camera with me. I'll be taking different pictures and have a different attitude depending on what camera I take with me.
Right.
There are no two ways about it. Yeah, my pictures are different, and the way I'm approaching taking pictures is totally different. My whole mindset is different based on what I have hanging around my neck, because each one has its own limitations, has its strong points and weaknesses. And then what I do is I'll change my ways for that day depending on what I chose to take with me to capture pictures.
All right.
So speaking of different cameras, let's get back to our list. We were going to talk about the other Fujifilm options for people who don't have unlimited funds and
Want the camera now.
Yeah.
Now, and that's in air quotes.
Yeah.
So, this is one of the things that kind of was boggling my mind back when the X100 went viral. When I've mentioned this before, Fujifilm does a great job of keeping things fairly consistent as far as your image quality. If there's people who buy an X100 and just because of hype, and then they halfway down the road of having it, they're just like, wait, I can't change lenses on this, or I want to just get in closer. And it's just like, wait, so why? Because they just bought into the hype. Not a lot of people are informed, but there is a percentage of people who don't realize that until they actually take a few steps forward into it. When you look at the Fujifilm lineup, you have the X-T5, which came out prior, 40 megapixels, backside illuminated sensor. Then you have the X-T50, which came out in June, 40 megapixels, a non-backside illuminated sensor, but the same processor as the X-T5. It's basically a baby X-T5. That's usually how the nomenclature works with the model number. X-T whatever number is the main model, then that same number with a 0 is just a smaller version of that. And they share a lot of the specs, are very close. So this one has a dedicated film dial. Like I said, it's 40 megapixels, just 4K 60, 6.2. You could change lenses on it. It has AI-assisted autofocus, which is coming autofocus du jour for a lot of brands. And then you also have on the other side, which was recently released, is the XM5, which goes into the whole mindset of taking the X-T50 idea and mixing it with the 26 megapixel X-Trans sensor version 4, which was a variation of the same sensor that was in the X100V. And this camera also has that AI autofocus and has the newer processor that's in the current generation cameras with the dedicated film dial. But this comes down to different strokes for different folks. If someone who shoots video, like on an FX3 and doing all these shots for different brands and stuff like that, they may not like the XM5 because it's not for them. It's for someone who wants a certain appeal. It has very good autofocus, very good specs in the video space. It is Fujifilm's answer to all the vlogging cameras that have been coming out. Sony has their options. Nikon has their options. So this gives another option, and the price is pretty good on this. And it has the same saw sets in the other Fujifilm cameras. So if someone's looking and says, this camera isn't in stock, I'm going to get close to the same image quality of the camera that went viral a few years ago with the same processor of what's out now. So there's options in the realm of Fujifilm that will give you the same look without having to wait on a back order list for a year. So it's a really creator-friendly camera, and that's what I think a lot of brands are doing now, trying to cater to like the content creator. And I think maybe that market's getting a little bit saturated, too many cameras with that, but I think every brand should have at least one or two options in that space so you have choices. And I think that's where we're going with this.
By content creator friendly, you're basically referring to the capabilities of the video recording.
Correct. Because if someone's just doing photo, they probably will look at a different camera, maybe something like the X-T5, X-T50. XM5 doesn't have a viewfinder, which for a photographer, I find that important. It's another part of stabilization to kind of, I don't want to be looking at a screen like shooting from the hip, but this is for someone who wants to do both, like 50-50 split or more 60-40, but they have a Fujifilm already, or they like what Fujifilm offers as far as film simulations. Maybe they want open gate recording or things like that.
It seems like the amputation of the viewfinder is, I hate it. And it does seem like companies will do this so they're non-cannibalizing themselves. because for a still photographer, a viewfinder is so paramount to the process. Once you take that out, you are really hamstringing that camera, and you're putting it into this other category immediately as a content creator, video type camera.
And to go about on that point, it's not anything new with removing the viewfinder. Sony, I brought up Sony, so let's go by them. Back then they had like the A5100, and then that had no viewfinder, so that anything with a A5000 would have no viewfinder, then the 6000 had a viewfinder, so on and so forth. So it's not out the norm, especially when it comes to mirrorless cameras.
It's been going on for a decade or so,
yeah.
but I've always seen it as kneecapping the camera, but also in a way you're signaling that this is for video people.
Video people or people who are coming from a smartphone who never use a viewfinder. That's important.
There you go.
That's another mindset. Like they don't see the importance of a viewfinder.
Right.
They're coming from a PowerShot Elf, and you're just like, I never used a viewfinder.
Right,
Why is that important?
Mm-hmm.
People think you have to take pictures at arm length. It's true.
It's not.
I had to get used to it. I really did.
I've never gotten used to it, and I don't know if it's because I like to be discreet, and you can't be without a viewfinder. You got to hold it out in front of your face like that, and that's something about it.
But think about being discreet, though. A lot of great photographers shot from the hip.
Right.
When you put a camera to your face, it kind of triggers people. People like their ears go up because it's
true. The paradigm now is once a camera is up to your face, you're a real photographer who is up to no good, and must be chased out of the subway car immediately.
So on that note, should we segue to the resurgence of film cameras? That's a pretty interesting development this year.
Oh, yes, it has. So, Pentax, Ricoh, or just Ricoh itself, they came out with the film project in which they were working on a film camera. And I'm not sure which year in podcasts I mentioned it. I was like, one of the things I wanted to see was someone like Pentax come out with a film camera because they're the only ones who don't have a mirrorless camera. And lo and behold, they announced this project and they came out with the Pentax 17, which kind of made me laugh a little bit because when I was in Japan in January, I had one target in mind to buy a camera, and what I wanted to buy was a half-frame camera.
A Petri?
No, an Olympus Pen EF.
Oh, yeah, sure. Okay.
I think that was their last half-frame camera. So I bought that out there, and then months later, guess what happens? Pentax comes out with a half-frame camera, which is good. The Pentax costs more money than the used Olympus that I purchased, so I saved some money. But it's a 35mm half-frame camera, so for those who don't know, every picture is half a frame of 35mm. So if you have 24 roll exposures, that will be 48 pictures on there. If you have 36, then you have 72. So that's a lot of pictures to go through. So imagine me trying to test a half-frame camera and being like, oh, this roll's not ending yet. Let me keep going. And it's not over with. But the Pentax 17, I kind of liked how they announced it because everything on the camera itself is a reference to an older Pentax camera, which I found interesting. Like there's a document online that says the number is the font we use for this camera. This is the texture of this camera. And it was really interesting. I guess you'll save money with the economics of being half-frame, which is one reason why half-frame exists.
Hold on. Now, I'm curious. Is that a prime mover in this because of scarcity of film and film expense and developing all of these industries of developing film, selling film makes it a little more scarce than 25 years ago. So, why not do the half frame?
You're not saving that much with it. You're saving on the film end of it, but if you're making prints, you're still paying for the prints. It doesn't matter what size the negative is and how many frames you got on a roll. Right. If you're paying a buck or two a print, you're paying a buck or two a print.
Right. Or it's also in today's world. I mean, getting a roll of 24 pictures after you have a smartphone that can take 24 shots in half a second.
Yeah, you got to learn discipline.
Okay. All right. Fine.
You don't photograph your food after you finished eating it. You just take a picture of it before you stick your fork in it. That's all. No one cares what the plate looks like dirty. Sorry.
But my question is, does the image quality aspect hold up?
Of course not. It's going to be
Yeah.
half the resolution. But then again, it depends what film you're shooting. If you're shooting a fine-grained film, it'll be okay. If you're putting a high-speed film in it, it's going to look grainy. That's really what it is.
But it's not about image quality.
I don't think people are buying it for image quality. If you're buying a point and shoot, you're not buying it for image quality. You're not shooting 8x10. You're not going out to shoot landscapes like Ansel Adams. What I'm curious about, there would be kind of a giggle if the camera takes off. If anybody is going to start producing, it used to be back in the 50s and 60s, if you went away to like a hotel or a resort or some kind of a big social event, there'd be photographers going around with these little half-frame cameras, taking pictures of everybody, developing it really fast, and then cutting them up, and then putting the little half-frame slides, they shoot transparency film, into these little plastic viewers that are keychains. So you got this little thing about 2 inches long, color plastic with a little peephole on one side, and then the back of it was frosted plastic, and you look in and you see the picture.
I've seen those before.
Yeah, it used to be a standard thing that that was like a lot of photographers earn their money traveling around to hotels doing this stuff and making a killing every weekend.
My first thought was to be like, that's something that you'll just have to remember because that's not coming back. But upon just a couple seconds of reflection, all of these nostalgia, vintage resurgencies, there's so much niche is the thing, and there's spaces for all of this stuff. Mm-hmm. And so I can see that being kind of hip or whatever the kids are doing nowadays.
One thing to note about something that I've noticed when you said about having like the negatives and putting out prints, you'd be surprised how many people don't do the prints.
Oh, I know.
Yeah. And there's an option, like when I get my rolls of film developed, there's an option. They ask, do you want to keep the negatives? And a lot of times people say no, because these are people who don't have the space. They're not, obviously it's not slide film most of the time. So it's just like, oh, I got the scans. I'm done with it. It's taking up space. I'm not going to make an album of my negatives. I'm not going to rescan these, which you should. But people are using film cameras, just doing it for the scans, editing them, done.
That's so weird.
Yeah.
That's very weird.
Yeah.
It's like deleting your RAWs, but I keep my negatives because I could always rescan at a higher resolution down the road.
Oh, yeah.
But people who just start out, like we have new hires who are coming in who just shot film. They don't do digital, which is interesting because they're younger than me.
Really?
Yeah. And they come in and like, oh, I've come from the film world. This is what I know. And then it's just like
different film world.
It's different coming in at this point, doing film as it was when that's the only option you had.
It's a Rip Van Winkle syndrome going around here.
It does feel very like a very weird time warp thing here. But Kevin, are most of these film camera users just getting the scans and not getting the prints? Is that the norm?
I don't know. I have to ask the film lab to see what the numbers are, but I know that I've seen like conversations between people who work in like dark rooms and stuff like that. And it's like a lot of like people just like discard them. Like, I don't need them. So we have Pentax with the 17. And the thing was, it was kind of obvious, the reaction to this camera was kind of like, wow, it's a new film camera. And it was like, I'm not paying that much for a half frame. And it was like a weird reaction that people were having online about it. I'm like, it's something new. It's the first step to a film camera that's actually brand new. Let's take this. If it does well, maybe other brands may do it.
And it has done well. At least on our website, it's a top seller.
I think it's definitely doing well on that point. And then another camera that was kind of mentioned as a 35mm film camera is by Mint, the Rollei 35AF, which is 35mm 2.8 lens. It has autofocus. It's a bit pricey probably because of the autofocus that's in there. And Mint has kind of proven itself to be kind of like a boutique brand in a way, but it has the Rollei branding on it. They got permission to use the Rollei branding.
Now, these are new cameras now. These are not old Rollei 35s that
Correct.
have been re-hacked or whatever you want to call it. These are new cameras based on the Rollei 35.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Who makes it?
Mint.
Mint.
And they're the ones who did the Polaroid cameras, right?
Yeah, they have versions of Polaroids. And the autofocus uses LiDAR. So if anybody knows what LiDAR is, it's active. It's almost like radar.
Cool.
Yeah, so it uses that for autofocus. It's interesting to see like a other film camera. So there's 2 releases this year. Actually, kind of more, but those are the 2 big ones that we actually sell here at B&H. But it's an interesting addition to everything. And once again, people kind of, scoff at the price.
And the Rollei is still just available as a pre-order. Is there any estimated delivery time?
Not that I've seen. I haven't had anybody ask for it. I was checking the website every so often when Mint announced it. I was checking to see if we were going to carry it, and it looks like if it's on our website, we probably will, but I'm not sure on what orders are going to be on that, because I don't want to use the word bespoke, but it's not mass-produced like a bigger camera.
I think for a lot of people, this is going to be a very new experience, because two features this camera has is a rewind crank and a film advance lever. And there are a lot of photographers who've never used these two items before, which I think is kind of funny.
It's so satisfying.
It is. This is totally analog. He's got dials and everything. It's really, really great. I like this. I really do.
It's a nice little camera.
So
people who have seen the Rollei 35S and such like that, small little. They're not spy cameras because they're not that small.
Oh no.
But it's small. It's nice. And the hot shoe on the Rolleis is on the bottom because of space.
Yes, that's correct. That's right. They squeezed it. Wherever there was room, that's where they put things that, and you had to be on there. If there's a space, that's right. I forgot about that. It had the bottom advance lever on it. That's really funny. Okay, we are going to take a short break so we could drop some quarters in the meters downstairs and come back up here. And we come back more with Kevin Rickert and cameras of 2024. Stay tuned. Okay, we are back with Kevin Rickert, who is going to be helping us go through the rest of all the new toys worth mentioning from 2024. What are we going to talk about next?
Flagships.
Ooh. And the first one we're going to speak about, the EOS R1 from Canon?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, Kevin, tell us about this new Canon flagship.
But the EOS R1 is Canon's true mirrorless flagship, because previously that flagship was 1DX, because people thought that the R3 was, but when the R3 came out, Canon was always saying, this is not our flagship. So in doing that, laid the groundwork for an EOS R1, which since this was an Olympic year, it's a perfect time to test flagships because they're built for speed. So here we are. So things to know about it spec-wise: 24 megapixel full-frame stacked BSI sensor. Stacked, what that does, it gives you extra speed. BSI, since the wire's not in the way, you get 50% better low light performance. You got 50% more light. It has an accelerator, better processing, eye control AF, which is when you could look and focus on something. All the bells and whistles that you should have in a flagship, because that's what a flagship means. It's all your best tech in there.
Question though, has the word flagship, does it denote not only flagship, but also purposely built for photojournalism? I mean, when I look at the flagship cameras from the big three, they seem to have both the horizontal, vertical built-in grips. They seem to be made for action and photojournalism, and that's part of the signal of the word flagship. Is that correct? Or
that is close to being on point, because some brands don't do that, Sony. But the idea, the word flagship, is just this is where we're putting all our best technology
for a working professional.
Exactly.
Day to day, in and out, this is the workhorse.
For anything.
Right.
So the R1 just denoted the flagship camera. That's one thing, too, I want to say, is that people kind of get lost in the sauce when it comes down to the resolution of a flagship camera. Why is the Canon EOS R1 24 megapixels? Well, because if you're shooting on the sidelines of a sporting event and you're going through 2,000 photos, you need to get that to where it needs to go very quickly. It's harder to do that when it's 100, 61, 50, 45 megapixels. So it has to be nimble. And if you look at the flagship cameras of the past, except for Nikon recently with the Z8, Z9 cameras, they were modest in resolution because it's about nimbleness. But yeah, the R1 is built for speed. It has good video specs, very good video specs, 6K 60, because no manufacturer's ignoring video these days. Even though a photographer who's doing photojournalism may not use it that way, if they want to do a quick 10-second clip, it's possible. Obviously, it has a vertical grip, things like that in there. So the EOS R1 was announced after the Olympics in November.
A lot of compute power in this thing. It feels like they've stuffed an M4 Max computer in there or something. In terms of upscaling in camera in terms of these AI neural nets for autofocus. Training is all in there. Very powerful.
Yeah, it's built to make sure anytime you can miss a shot if you leave the lens cap on the camera.
Been there, done that.
And then you have another flagship that came out this year was recently the A1 II or Alpha 1 II. It should be hitting the market around January probably, but it was announced very recently. So this is just a straight up update to the original Sony flagship, the Alpha 1, the A1, 50 megapixel stacked sensor, backside illuminated. Once again, you see a trend there. This has the AI tracking, which the original version did not have. It did not have the AI tracking. So this just puts it on par with the other Sony releases, the recent ones. Still has your 8K in there, 30 frames per second. It does have that pre-capture and speed boost button that the A9 III from last year had. They upped the image stabilization to 8.5 stops, which is great. You know, all the best Sony features are thrown in this camera.
What I think is interesting is that the Canon, which has a 24 megapixel stack sensor, that will do 40 frames per second. And the Sony, the sensor is twice the resolving power. It's a 50 megapixel, will do 30 frames per second.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's pretty interesting that they were able to apparently squeeze a lot more performance out of their system than the Canon. Am I right or wrong about that? Because they're pumping more data at not that much less speed.
Yeah, it's about how the imaging pipeline works, how their processing works. That's why the processes brand to brand will be different.
Yeah.
By the way, correct me if I'm wrong, but Sony makes a lot of the sensors for other cameras.
Oh, yeah.
But the exception would be Canon, right? Does Canon make their own sensors?
There's a lot of things that Canon's mum on. So you need someone to actually break it open and confirm it. But my stance is like Canon's one of the few brands that does not take chips from Sony.
Right.
And it's not like a binary thing. It's more just like there could be some models that could be, but usually a lot of brands, and there's also other sensor manufacturers out there, but some brands are just like, we're not going to tell you, or you're not going to able to find out a certain way. But some brands you can look at two different models, like that's kind of the same spec-wise, and you kind of deduce it from there. But yeah, like most of the flagship have all the horsepower to do 30 or 40 frames per second rather easily, and it's based on sensor design. If it's stacked, it's built for speed. So that's one thing to note when you're shopping for a camera and you need speed. If you see the word stacked in there, that's getting you your extra boost. Anything else on that A1 II?
Not a huge overhaul from the A1.
No, it's mainly this is just
This is a tick rather than a talk.
Yeah, exactly. It's just because if you look at how Sony has put out cameras, they came out with the A7R5 that had the AI processor chip. Then they came out with the A7C II, which essentially is the A7 IV, but it has that AI processing in there now. The A9 III obviously has that, so their flagship didn't have that up until now. So
I like how your eyes get more and more cross-eyed as the numbers start to like.
Yes, it's one of my major. I may have mentioned this last year, but Sony, it's a different body type. Just name the A7C series A5. It's shorter, so there you go. It's a smaller number. Now it makes sense to people. I don't have to get my eyes crossed. It's not that hard. Unless you're saving the A5 for something else, but just call the smaller cameras A5. Then you're done. It makes sense to me. I'm sure to all the customers too.
Sure. We're all with you, Ken.
Yeah, thank you. OM System, they came out with their flagship. They're often overlooked because it's a micro four thirds sensor, so a lot of people kind of like poo-poo to that. But there is a need for this, and I think we mentioned it before with like exit level cameras for people who want to photograph wildlife. So. And I see this a lot. Customers call up and say, I'm retiring now. I want to travel more and take pictures of wildlife in the Sahara, things like that. Honestly, the OM system is great for that because you get a lot of speed. It's like 10 frames per second shooting on this, which isn't a lot, but it's also 20 frames per second mechanical with the electronic shutter, which doesn't really affect you if you're not in artificial light.
120 frames per second with the electronic shutter.
It's a stacked sensor, and what I said before, stacked basically means that it's to be very fast, very high readout on that one. It's weather sealed, freeze proof, dual card slots, because if you're a pro, you need those 2 card slots. But yeah, it's a really good system, and I know someone in the store who loves this. He takes it out from the library often because it does what he needs as far as taking pictures of birds and other types of wildlife that exist in the area over here. Like go to Central Park, you're a birder. And the technology that they put in there is really good. I don't think OM system needs to be overlooked, but like I said, there's tools for certain things you're trying to accomplish, and this is a good tool for someone who doesn't want to carry a Z9 or Z8 and have like carpal tunnel in like a week or so.
So the other thing I'm curious about with the Micro Four Thirds is aspect ratio of that versus APS-C. And from what I've read, it does a better job with vertical format imagery.
It's almost square, Micro Four Thirds.
Wasn't it more like an actual 8x10 format, 11x14? I think it fits right into that 4x5 A10. So for the standard sizes, it actually works quite well. If you're doing an 8x10, you want full frame, you get a lot for your money out of that compared to a full frame that has to be cropped.
You got a 3x2 ratio on a full frame, and you got 4x3 ratio, which is a tube TV. Remember those? 4x3. That's where Micro Four Thirds comes from. It's 4/3.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a 20-minute YouTube video, and it needs 20 minutes to explain it of why it's called 4/3. I mean, there's no way I'd be able to go through it, but maybe we'll put it on the show notes. It's amazing.
Oh, cool.
So those are the flagships that come out this year. The EOS R1 from Canon, Sony A1 version 2, and then the OM system OM1. So those are your ones built for speed, for capturing the Olympics, birds, or whatever else your heart desires. You also have some updates that have happened this year, just like refreshes for cameras. So Nikon in June announced the Z6 III, and one of the things that threw a curveball with this camera, a lot of specs look almost identical to the prior version. So 24 megapixel, partially stacked CMOS sensor. So I mentioned before that stacked sensors equal speed. So when I saw the word partially stacked, I tried to dive into how do I explain that? Because when I do new hire trainings, I'm like, this is a normal sensor, this is backside illuminated, this is a stacked sensor, and then all of a sudden, it's partially stacked. And as I mentioned before, some brands are not forthcoming to how things work. And you have to dive and go deeper and deeper, and sometimes you don't get any answers, and you just have to like figure it out. But what I discovered is that sensors themselves, especially stacked sensors, isn't a binary thing. It could be partially stacked, meaning that the chipsets that are involved to get that speed don't need to cover every single row of pixels. It could be some of those pixels, hence partially stacked. So that gives you better speed than a non-stacked sensor, but it won't cost as much as a fully stacked sensor. So this is like a nice,
intermediary.
Exactly. It's like how lens manufacturers usually use different types of glass, like a spherical glass and the optical glass. It's like lens manufacturers use things to do cost-cutting measures. So this is one thing that kind of make things more economical, because the price on this camera is pretty good. So it's good for someone who doesn't need the high resolution of like the Z7 series or the Z8 and Z9, something modest. You don't want to melt your computer when you're downloading the raw files. It has good video features at 6K 60 with NRAW and ProRes RAW for if you're into video. It does slow motion. It's 20 frames per second in RAW, 60 frames per second with JPEG shooting. It's actually really good if you want to actually go out there and photograph birds as well without a flagship camera. It has a camera-to-cloud connectivity on there, so it's a good update that kind of rounds out that whole initial Nikon mirrorless lineup, like the Z6 and the Z7 that came out back in 2018, if I recall.
Seems like the price is right on this.
That's a sweet spot.
Yeah.
Also, I think this camera will kind of push the other manufacturers to come out with cameras in that range, because I think $2,000, roughly, give or take, is a good point to have your best. I don't want to say entry level because it's not entry level.
It's not entry level. That's what I mean. It's like a real well-rounded camera. It won't break the bank.
Yeah, because you get a lot of what you may need. If you're a photographer and 24 megapixels is good enough for you, perfect. It has video features, so if you're going to dabble in video, maybe you don't do video now, but you may get into it later based on where life takes you, it does it. And you don't have to worry about buying another camera down the road because it doesn't do that. Granted, it's not going to do 8K, but 6K and 4K is good enough these days because data has a price.
Yeah.
Because Nikon went with their update. Canon, at the same time as the EOS R1, they announced the EOS R5 Mark II. So the R5 was probably one of the best selling cameras that we've had. It sold like hotcakes, and I rarely see hotcakes sold. But I don't know where that term came from. But this is the newer generation. Everybody knew this was coming out because you had the R6 Mark II come out last year. So everybody's like, where's the R5? Where's the R5? So here it is. This is your 45 megapixel stack sensor, built for speed, BSI, better light gathering performance. It has that great Canon autofocus with the eye control that was in the EOS R3, the EOS R1. So now you can control your autofocus by looking.
But by the way, on this one feature, have you used it?
I haven't used that feature because you need to calibrate it. And when you have 15 people trying out a camera, you have to calibrate it to your eye. So,
Wow.
So if you have different user, but when you're doing it in a training space, it kind of gets a little...
Do you know how many points it has?
I think it corresponds to the actual how many points the camera has, and now it knows like where to look.
I'm stuck on this feature because this is something that I remember my father showing me a Minolta Maxim. This is 1986 or 87. I was a little kid. He brought home this camera, and he's like, look in the viewfinder. Check this out. And it had, I think, 3 or 5 points. They were just horizontal. And as you looked at these points with your eyes, it would like light up red. And I thought this was like amazing G.I. Joe, Terminator technology. And then it went away. And, then it just was not a feature for many years until...
Canon had it on a film camera. Alan, do you remember which one that was?
I'm trying to think, but I do remember when that came out. I remember when it came out, and I remember trying it, and I was fascinated with the fact that it really did work. It really did.
Yeah, it was...
I mean, it went away in terms of it wasn't introduced in this whole digital revolution until 2024 or 23.
Yeah, with the R3. I think that was 2021 or 22 because I remember showing it off in the store.
And it just seems like such a cool way to be able to focus, I mean, it feels like the way you focus in real life.
Well, yes and no. There were
tell me.
problems with it because there were times... and in fact, I found this. I actually was using a Canon camera, and that's when I discovered it. I was working on something, I don't know what it was, but while I was photographing my subject, I had to keep watching the background. There's a lot of stuff going around.
And this young lady kept walking by.
Yeah, in a skimpy top.
All the pictures are out of focus.
No, but seriously, if you are scanning the background while you're working, there are times you have to just turn that stuff off. Lock your focus because, again, I know there's one time it drove me nuts. I had to keep my eye not only on my subject, but I had to be very aware of what was going on. There was a lot of things, distracting things in the background. I had to select when I hit the shutter, and it worked against me.
Right.
So you have a bunch of pictures of food in the background, I guess, right?
No, there were a couple of frames where I noticed that it definitely shifted my focus, and I just turned it off. I went to manual. I didn't want my focus moving at all.
Yeah, it's a feature that it's good for if you need it, and it's there.
And it's good to know you can turn it off if you don't want it or don't need it. That's all.
Exactly.
There's a time and a place for everything.
Exactly.
Now, Kevin, this camera is twice as expensive as the Nikon Z6 III. But would you call these more or less equivalent? No.
No, the EOS R6 Mark II is more equivalent to this.
Gotcha.
It's like brands, and we've known this for a while, like brands are now giving you, do you want vanilla or chocolate? Do you want 24 megapixels or do you want 45 or more? And Sony started that. Panasonic does it. Canon now does it. Nikon does it. Even Fujifilm started to do it with the XH series. It's like, this is the stacked one. This is not the stacked one.
Are these companies going to eventually be sort of forced out of that paradigm by better and better upscaling software like the Topaz stuff? Like eventually?
I don't think so. Because you have people who don't want to deal with that.
Right.
It's just like, let me just get it in camera, done.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think if you have more sensors that do what the Leica does with the triple resolution, that will be a path to go on, which more people would do.
Or the R1 with the 96 megapixel upscaling in camera.
There's pros and cons to that, but that'll be good because the R5 Mark II does 179 megapixel upscaling, but your output will have a look because sometimes if you look at your result,
Right, the
lower.
JPEG versus the
it's
RAW, it's not going to be exactly the same.
Yeah.
The Leica actually does, it has that massive megapixel, and you can just crop in like that,
Yeah, it's just one of those things, managing size. But the R5 series was always the one that's good for people who want your high resolution and you want to do video as well. Or maybe both, or maybe none. So it's one of those situations that it gives you a lot. And that's why it's priced a little bit more than its little brother, the R6 Mark II.
The R6 is at that $2,000 mark.
Yeah. It's like when it comes to high resolution, you're going to pay for that for the most part. But a lot of things that existed when this camera launched, because there's a bit of controversy, they announced a new type of LPE6 battery, the LPE6P, and Canon, when they announced this camera, they were saying like, oh, you can't do certain video modes with the older battery that came with the R5, so if someone was upgrading. But firmware updates recently have kind of fixed that. There's still issues with using like the older battery, but for the most part, firmware updates will be released to make more quality of life updates on this camera. But when it comes down to that, on firmware updates, a lot of brands are focusing on getting more out the camera they already have with firmware updates, whether that be more video options, better autofocus. You can't do too much because a lot of that's hardware, but the firmware, between hard and soft, allows you to get more out of it. And it's an important part of having a camera, much like if you have a car, you have to get oil changes. You have to make sure your camera is firmware updated. And that comes to when you're troubleshooting as well. A lot of times people call and they say the camera's not working with X, Y, and Z. The speed light doesn't work with it. And then you talk to them and say, all right, did you do a firmware update? And it's always like, oh, what's that? And it's just like, you need to do that. And some brands, you could send it to them. But most of the time, it's on the user end, as simple as downloading something to a memory card and just following the steps. And you get so much functionality out of your camera.
Right. Well, sometimes these firmwares can transform cameras.
Yeah.
And I guess we might mention quickly this, I think, polarizing thing where camera manufacturers are sometimes charging people.
But yeah, firmware is an important thing. Like I said, it adds features. It may fix something that may have been an issue at launch. Fujifilm was really big at using it to like launch a camera, and then they had a roadmap on what the firmware updates would do down the road. So that kind of lays the groundwork for brands to ship this camera sooner, but this functionality will be coming down the road. You want this feature? Yeah, it's coming in a firmware update, so on and so forth.
And more or less those promises are kept.
Yeah. It may take a while, and sometimes brands have, messed up and like put out a firmware update and inherently
broke the camera.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when it comes down to firmware updates, they're simple. Just have to read the steps, and the steps are download this file, put on a memory card, enter card into camera, hit OK, wait 3 minutes, done, and that's it.
And as we see more cameras becoming just actual computers with like a lens on them, the firmware will be a much more robust and important kind of tool to keep the longevity of these cameras going. I mean, I guess in many ways there already are basically small computers with an opening for a lens.
Yeah. When it comes down to like firmware, if you're ever troubleshooting and you need to get everything on the same page, just firmware update everything, put everything on the same page, and then take it from there. It's a lot easier to troubleshoot when you do that. And obviously, it goes without saying, you can't firmware update everything. You can't get AI autofocus in a camera that doesn't have the chipset for that, or you can't improve your resolution. You can't go from a 24 to a 60 because that's a hardware thing. But you can get better speed, better video options, maybe some extra bonus features like that. On to the next camera update this year, Leica with the SL3. They made the SL line more of a true, I put that in air quotes, a true Leica camera, as opposed to something that was mirroring another brand's offerings. But this camera, 60 megapixel, BSI CMOS sensor, which has that triple resolution, which is much like a Q3. It puts everything underneath the same umbrella, I feel, and it gets phase detection and contrast autofocus, which is great. So you have more responsive autofocus. You have that resolution. You have the Leica look, stabilization. Has this 8K. So if a Leica user wants to do video, sure. But it's there, and it's like a good high-performance camera. A very nice update from the SL to the SL2 to the SL3. I think they finally found their own. And I think also the body size was really nice on this one. It didn't feel like you were lugging a touch head case or something like that.
What did you mean by Leica making this their own camera? What characteristics were you pointing towards?
I'm pointing out, if you compare this to the Panasonic S1, S1R, you see a lot of similarities with
the SL2.
The SL2, yeah.
Right. The SL3 looks different.
The SL3 looks different, and also the sensor is actually something that you only find in Leica.
Gotcha. Yeah, I wonder if that's what I noticed when I borrowed a friend's M11 Leica recently. I mean, the M camera, it's really different than any of the other modern mirrorless cameras with their AI autofocus. I mean, Leica's gone in a totally opposite direction. To me, it's as if they've simply replaced the insides of a vintage Leica, where the film would go, whatever that's called, and slotted in a digital sensor and hard drive. But everything is so old school slow, and so that took some time for me to get adjusted to. But also the Leica DNGs are very different looking, and to my mind, they're better looking than other modern digital cameras. The contrast, I mean, the inky blacks and the bokeh roll-off, it was really it was really nice. The camera I borrowed came with an expensive Leica lens, so maybe that's what was making the difference.
I personally find that lenses from Leica and Zeiss, both of those two companies, there's a certain look about them that is different, and the term that I've heard a lot that I'm attributing to is micro contrast.
Yes.
And there's a certain snap and sparkle that I get no matter what camera, because again, I switch back and forth between my Sony and my Leica, and I use a lot of the lenses back and forth. I just adapt them. And that's what I notice, is that for those particular lenses, there's a certain snap that I don't get from other brand lenses. And I like the looks of other lenses, but there's something very specific that is unique about the final results you get from Leica glass and Zeiss, and it has to do with the quality of the glass and the coatings and the way it's designed.
Before we move on to APS-C, Fujifilm did announce an update to the GFX 100S line, which is the GFX 100S II. Obviously, based on the name, it's 100 plus megapixels, so it's 102 megapixels, has the newer image processor in there. So this is a smaller body compared to the GFX 100 II.
Does S stand for smaller?
In my brain, that's how it works. It is a smaller camera. It's nice.
Well, I mean, what is S denoting here?
I would say smaller.
Okay,
yeah.
okay. Yeah. It's not sensitivity or anything.
No. It's the same sensor as the big 100. It's a smaller size. It's a little bit more compact. The GFX 100, the big one, is big. But you have your high resolution, 100 megapixels, does video. And Fujifilm did announce their foray into the cinema industry with their Eterna, but we won't discuss that here. So that's 4K 30 video if you're so interested. It has 400 megapixel pixel shift multi-shot. So if you want a really, really, really big image, there you go. And of course, it's a Fujifilm camera, so film simulations.
What's up with the price differential between the GFX 100 and the GFX 100S? Why is it so much more expensive, the older model?
If you look at the video output, I believe that's one thing. One does 4K 60, the other one was 4K 30.
You're right.
So a lot of that comes down to...
The EDF is not as...
Yep. You have 9.4 M dots versus 5.6 M dots, things like that. I wouldn't say cost-cutting measures, because it's not cost, it's just making a more efficient model. So if you don't need all the bells and whistles that the GFX 100 II give you, you could do the GFX 100 S2. I do like what Fujifilm has done with the medium format. They made it more accessible, and I hope they continue to do so.
And I think it's kind of funny they went from APS-C directly to the larger format, just skip what everyone else is just calling full frame.
And they own the larger format. I mean, they dominate that because Hasselblad is the other company, and they're twice as expensive.
I think it was a smart decision because when it came out, when they went to medium format, it was like, why are we going to go to a party that everybody's at?
Right.
We just go start our own party.
No, it made a lot of sense. They were just going to be joining a crowded scene. And it would also put a competition for all of their cameras. 3 different formats, I think would actually confuse customers a little bit. It would just dilute them. Yeah, you got 2 great systems right there and just stay there. That makes sense.
It does. It makes sense. On the APS-C side, there was a few updates this year. You had a Nikon Z50 II, which was announced very recently in November. So this is your APS-C, they call it DX format, 20.9 megapixel sensor. It uses the newer X-Speed 7 image processor, so once again, a bump in the imaging pipeline. So that gives you better autofocus and better video quality, things like that. So you have 4K 60, 120p video recording if you want to do video. You have that dedicated picture control button. Another brand putting out a feature to kind of compete with the FUJIFILM cameras, like have little presets in there. But it's a nice little compact camera, a little step up from the prior version, but not overly like blowing people out the water with specs that they can't handle. So this is a good entry point within the Nikon mirrorless line for someone who wants to do photo and may want to do video as well. And on the other side of things, you do have Sony with their option, which also begins with a Z, the ZV-E10 II. These names are getting annoying because they're just adding numbers and letters to things, and it's not easy to say. They should just give them like car names, like how Fujifilm had a Natura and the Tiara and things like that. But yeah, Sony with the ZV-E10 II, it's a 26 megapixel APS-C camera. This is a vlogging camera, so it's meant to do photo and video well, but it has like background to focus, product showcase. If you're having like a unboxing on a vlog, that it could focus on the box, and then once you move your hand out, it goes back to your face seamlessly. Has a better microphone than most cameras. Has a directional 3-capsule mic.
The big difference that stands out to me is that one has a dedicated electronic viewfinder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The Z50 is
firmly a vlogging camera.
Yeah, the Z50 II and the Z50 prior to that was basically Nikon's, this is your DX format, photo-centric camera because of the viewfinder. The Z30 was more the vlogging one, so that's sans viewfinder. With the Sony is like, hey, if you want the viewfinder, you get the A6700, which uses the same sensor as the ZV-E10 II, as does the FX30. In a way. All those cameras are 3 different versions of, once again, different strokes for different folks. You have the one who's like very video-centric, they're going to go with an FX. If they're more photo-centric, want something smaller, A6700. If they're getting into it, want to be a vlogger, they need more video capability, they're probably going to go with a ZV-E10 on that point. And then, based on the whole idea of vlogging, Panasonic came out with the Lumix S9 this year, which was kind of a interesting addition to their lineup because it is, once again, another volley to how things are trending towards smaller, larger sensor cameras, X100, things like that. So this camera is 24 megapixels, backside illuminated sensor, phase detection autofocus. So this has like the newer autofocus systems that Lumix has introduced to their lineups, which is great. Because that used to be a sticking point for a lot of customers. They wanted phase, but they were doing the DFD contrast, but now they accepted phase detection, which is great. This is an articulating LCD. There's no viewfinder, so some people may be upset about that, but the purpose of this camera is for content creation. I wouldn't use it as a photo camera because I like viewfinders, but there's some people who just, like I said before, who don't use viewfinders at all for photo, so this may be fine for them. But the idea here is that they have an app and a way to load lookup tables, LUTs, which are like presets in the video space, to simplify it a little bit, to output to photos and videos. So if one wants a predetermined look, they have a certain way that they record, a certain like style that they're known for, they can load into the camera and record it that way. It also does open gate video at 4K.
What's open gate?
Open gate essentially is video as we consume it comes in either 16:9 or 17:9 aspect ratio, widescreen format. When you put a camera into video, it's going to take a 3:2 sensor and put it into 16:9. You're losing the top and bottom.
Crop.
It's crop, but you're not losing like the width. Most of the time, if it's a full width readout, it's full width. So, problem with that, if I'm recording for social media, which is vertical, I have to tilt the camera one way and do it that way. And then if I want to do something for landscape, I have to re-record the same thing, put the other way. So now I'm recording twice. OpenGate allows me to record in the 3:2 format and then do it in post.
Gotcha.
Granted, in my idea, in the frames, you have to kind of take it in and adjust for this.
Hold on, so it doesn't have an overlay?
I think some cameras do have a grid lines. You can kind of figure it out. But it's one of those things to help you so you get the full swath of information and you can just trim it to what you want, which is more flexible.
And the term for that is open gate.
Open gate, yeah. Come from the video world. Like most of the Fujifilm cameras that recently have that, the XM5 has that. The XH series has that. The Panasonic S5 series has it. This S9 has it. And I kind of want more manufacturers to do this, especially with smartphones. They should do that as well because most of the stuff is going to be either one way or the other. And it's annoying to kind of record the same thing twice in landscape and vertical. Just let me record it once and trim it down.
Gotcha. Okay. You don't have to turn the camera. You just get the one shot and then you can trim it in post.
Yeah, just give yourself enough room. It's a good foray. And this camera with firmware updates allowed it to record for unlimited recording time based on space and battery. As at launch, it did not. So with the firmware update, it allowed it to actually do a little bit more for video, which is great because that was one of the weird specs I saw when it first came. I'm like, if it's for video, why is it kind of like truncated? But now they fixed that with a firmware update. I'm not sure if it was an oversight or something that they wanted to make sure it could handle before doing this. But yeah, and it comes in different colors. So if you want pink,
I do.
Blue, it has that.
Nice.
It's a very interesting camera. I just wish it had a viewfinder.
I know. It'd be a great compact.
It's small.
So, Kevin, here's a question for you, because we've been talking about a lot of cameras here and all the differences and the good points and the bad points and stuff like that. Let's switch over to looking forward a little bit. What would your predictions be for 2025, and what picks would you have? Let's put a hybrid question to you.
All right, so for next year, going into it in 2025, I do feel like there'll be more point-and-shoot options. I'm not sure, like, in what sense, maybe more fixed lens options out there, but I think some brands will come out there and be like, all right, we need to put something out to take the market share that people are clamoring for. People want pocketable cameras. They don't want to be taking 5 lenses out. So I think more brands will be receptive to that. I'm not sure who will step up to the plate first, but there are some brands out there that should do that. I would love a digital version of a Canon net or something like that, or maybe a digital pen again, a fixed lens pen, which would be great. Maybe. We'll see about that. I also think that film cameras, there would probably, I hope, like 1 or 2 more film cameras out there on the market. They take a lot of time to engineer, so who knows if that's going to happen.
Are film choices still good right now? I know they were introducing films for a while, and then they were also cutting back. Is it kind of holding its own right now, the film market, as far as you know?
Harman Ilford came out with Phoenix 200 this year. I think it was this year. That's a new film stock. And there's always like the redone stuff that was cinema film that's been popular. But I feel like there's only like 3 brands when it comes down to film. Because you have like Kodak, Fujifilm, Harman Ilford. There's like Agfa too. But when it comes down to the big players, it feels like Kodak and Fujifilm are just like, all right, we have to slow production on this. And then they alternate. So it's better than what it has been, but it's not like you have so many options like you had before. So you kind of have to find your favorite film and roll with that. Like, it's still kind of precarious, I feel.
By the way, I have to giggle every once in a while. I'll see an article in one of the online photo sites, And somebody, I found a roll of Kodacolor in my uncle's Buick in the trunk that's been sitting out in Arizona, and I shot it and developed it. Look at the pictures, and it's crap. But they're making a big deal of that. They took a roll of film that was 9 years old in the trunk of a car in the desert for 9 years, and everything's green and yellow. But look at that, isn't it amazing? People are fascinated by it.
I tested a camera this year that had a roll of Kodak film in there from many years ago. It was given to me with that roll of film in there. And I finally got around to taking pictures on it, and it was like, everything is purple. And then the film lab responded to me like, yeah, this looks like heat damage. I'm like, I know it's heat damage. I just need to finish the roll. I just want to see what I was going to get. It's an interesting look. It looks like the camera works, but I have to put a newer roll of film in there. Yeah.
I got to say, as a child of a photographer, when I compare my childhood photos and the albums to any of my friends, what an amazing gift that I was given by my dad, who was a good photographer, who knew how to expose right. And then he scanned everything, about 20 years ago. So it's all online. And, seeing my grandparents and my parents when they were young and myself, and it's just really beautiful color. It's great. And I feel kind of sad for all my homies who just didn't have that opportunity.
So one of the things I did, because this was a milestone birthday for me this year, I had my father find the VHS tape of my first birthday recorded. It was on VHS tape, and my partner, she knows how to do it, transfer from VHS. But based on that, we digitized my first birthday, which was 39 years ago.
And the tape held up?
The tape held up. It's all about conditions. It was remarkable because I thought this tape would have had 40 years of going through the dredges of humid summers and stuff like that. And I've seen my partner transfer tapes from things that happened in the 80s, or in the same time frame that looked terrible, that she had to bake them so to get less distortion. And I looked at mine, I'm like, wow, this is crazy. I see my mother as, my age, a little bit younger than my age now, and my father and my grandmother, and I haven't seen my grandmother since, she passed away. And seeing her a video and hearing her voice, and I was just I was like, wow, I'm so glad that I actually have this digitally now.
You're very fortunate because most VHS tapes, after 10 years, if they're not used, the coatings basically flake off the acetate back. And if you're listening to this and you do have old VHS, they say the best thing you can do is at least once a year, take out the tapes, put them into a machine, assuming you have a VHS player, and play it and then rewind it. Have it go forward and backwards at least once a year. Otherwise, it's going to start just getting brittle and frail, and it will start flaking away.
Or just digitize them.
Yeah.
Digitize.
I guess that's the pro and con of there's people who have the tangible prints and the negatives, but sometimes people don't pay attention to the negatives and they get brittle too and they get that vinegary smell and stuff like that. Then on the side of it, everything's recorded. New mothers now, new fathers, at this every day is the kid to kid. So there's to be a lot of information, but the thing is, what do you do with that information?
It's a glut. There was no middle ground. We had absolute scarcity, where I was the only kid on my block. When my dad had a VHS camcorder, where he wore a knapsack on his back for the actual tape machine, and the camera was shoulder mounted. I had my first birthday on video too, and everything else. And then we transitioned to the iPhone, and you have petabytes of data, which you have to just go through with a fine-tooth comb to find anything cool.
It's a lot, and this ties into one of my picks for this year, is that I have a lot of data, too much. And as someone who, when I travel, takes a lot of photos, and everything's on Lightroom catalogs. And there was a software I came across called Peakto that allowed me to go through everything as one organized list of
multiple Lightroom
catalogs, and it was very cool. I'd be like, oh, these are my pictures from Hong Kong. Oh, that's in Japan, and it's offline as well, meaning that I don't have to have the hard drive plugged into that. So it was it allows me to get through all my information at a big glance, and there's some AI to it as well. So it could be beach pictures, and shows you all your beach pictures from all the different catalogs as well.
What's the name of that software?
Peakto.
Peakto.
It's really useful to go through all those pictures that I've taken over the years, and since my partner's an archivist, I do know the fact of keywording things and paying attention to that part of it makes it easier for me now. Like, oh, here's a keyword, here's a tag, I'm good.
So you like that Peakto? That's interesting. So it's an umbrella software for gathering from many different libraries.
Yeah, the version that's current, the heavier version, because they make a lighter version that just does like Lightroom, and the main version could do different
Apple Photos.
Yeah, Apple Photos, Capture One, Lightroom, and it could be all within that app, and they could all look at the photos.
Right.
And if there's duplicates, it lets you know. It's useful for me. I actually go through my work now and actually be active and call my stuff because it's a lot of information.
Got to call.
You got to call. And other software, Capture One came out with the new 16.5, which has match look. It could be one of those things that gets rid of presets in a way, because now you could just be like, I like how the colors in this image are. You could tell it you want to match the look of that image, and it'll...
Oh, you could find a reference image online. Okay, gotcha.
Like that. So you just have to load it, or if it's a picture you already have, you can just put it through, and it's called Match Look. It's on the newest version of Capture One. Which is interesting. So who knows if that idea will take away presets in a way?
It might. Presets are a little clunky for most people. And I can see Capture One having a website with reference photos like that one. Yeah.
Or just things on the road.
And then there was this one last thing about this iPhone.
The Fjordan?
The Fjordan, which I thought was really cool. Alan, I think
you sent it to me. I took a look at it. Yes.
I mean, like, everybody has a phone in their pocket in this day and age, but they don't see it as a camera. They see it as a different thing. And putting a dedicated module that's really slender, that has this shutter button and a function button and this and that, it sort of transforms the phone into a much more, you're thinking about it more as a camera and not just like snapping away just random willy-nilly.
I can relate to that very well, because one afternoon a week I've been teaching a photography class at my grandkids' high school. It's a little club, and I got about half a dozen students there. None of them have cameras. That was the funniest thing. We came in the first day. No one has a camera. They only have phones. Right. It changed my whole outlook of how I'm teaching photography, a complete rethinking of things. But yeah, it's a whole different reality. They're using cameras, but they're not cameras in that sense. Right. And you have to approach them differently.
Is the Fjordan are there other things like it out there that I just don't know about, or is it one of a kind?
Not that I've seen. Yeah. It's very unique in a way, because you have to get the case and it
snaps in.
It snaps in, or you can get there's an adapter that is MagSafe for Apple. And they have their own app, which is free, but it interfaces with that and a few others. And the new Leica app will get compatibility for the Fjordan soon. But it's cool because you could essentially start treating the iPhone itself almost like a point-and-shoot camera. And because it has a rocker and it has the dual stage shutter button as well. I took pictures with it during Halloween when we had a party and had the flash on the camera, and it felt like a point-and-shoot camera. Yeah,
it feels like a small. Yeah, that's what I imagine it would feel. And it uses Bluetooth to do all that.
Yeah, to pair, and then the battery is a
little watch battery.
A little watch battery, and just stick it in there. And it's actually seamless. And if you have like the live activities on the iPhone, once you attach the links, like the buttons for the app pop up right there on your front page. If you just want to go into take a photo, you press it, and it goes straight into the app, and you could just shoot to your heart's content.
Right. It just puts it in your mind that, okay, this is a camera for right now. When I take the thing off, there'll be a phone with a little camera attached to it. But right now, for this holiday party, it's a camera. I like that.
Yeah, the app works with the video as well, and it makes it more seamless and scratches an itch of cameras that no longer exist currently.
Yeah.
And this goes back to my hope that manufacturers wake up and smell the coffee.
Or just buy Fjordan.
Or, yeah, I mean, iPhones go for what? Like a Pro goes for almost the price of a...
As a premium point-and-shoot.
Yeah. Honestly, when it comes down to it.
I think you can make phone calls on them still.
And you could use it as a map.
I have maps on them too. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
All sorts of stuff in there.
Yeah, it's amazing. You can order food from it. It's
amazing.
Listen to this podcast on it.
Can you?
Yeah.
I don't remember which company it was, but one of the camera companies came out with an ad way back in the day when they first started coming out with cameras and phones. It goes, if your camera has a ringtone, it's not a camera.
That's
and it was brilliant. And at the time, it was perfect. Can't say that anymore.
What? We've reached that time again. It could be. I think that's actually like a catchy.
Very apt.
Okay. All right. Okay. Winding up here.
No, Kevin. Every single time you have it in the show, you're off going somewhere else on some great adventure. Do you have anything else coming up this year? Any good trips or any cool things you want to tell us about?
Let's see. Well. Like last year at this time, I was excited to go to Texas for the eclipse, But unfortunately, I had too much cloud cover, so I just got clouds for that. There's next time, I suppose, so we'll see what happens in 2026. But one of my major goals for travel this year would be visiting Taiwan.
Whoa.
I did Thailand this year, so maybe Taiwan next year. It's like all the signs are pointing me in that direction.
I mean, go there before it's
know.
no longer
Before
there.
it's too late.
Exactly where I'm going this year. But I was in Chicago. I see a train go by, and it says, visit Taiwan. I'm like, okay. I was in a bar in London when I went to see the Mets out there, and the guy at the bar is talking to me. He's like, yeah. You know what's really good? Taiwan. You should go. I'm like, that's on my list. And then a few people from here, where did they go on the break? Taiwan. And then a photographer I follow online is in Taiwan. So I'm like, I guess all the signs are saying, Taiwan. Go there. Go there now.
Next stop.
Yeah, next stop. But, you know, to be little things this year, and then, I don't know, maybe Greece too. I don't know. We'll see when we get there.
Yeah. Kevin Rickert, thank you so much for joining us again today. It's always great having you back here for your thoughts at the end of each year and new predictions, and looking forward to having you back here again. So again, thanks. It's always great having you on board.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.
Great. Now, if you are a fan of the show but not yet a subscriber, head on over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, B&H Photos YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts, and click subscribe. You can also find us on the Explorer blog, where we post photos from our guests along with our show notes. And please join us on Facebook at the B&H Photography Podcast group, where you can share your favorite photos and comments about the show. I'm your host, Alan Weitz. Jill Waterman is our creative producer. Episodes are recorded, mixed, and edited by technical producer Mike Weinstein. Our executive producer is Richard Stevens. And on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for tuning in today.